In this video, we're going to be taking a look at wireless VR sim racing. Hi everybody, in my last video I looked at the Oculus Quest 2 using a link cable. In this video I've got myself a Wi-Fi 6 router and I'm going to try to do wireless VR gameplay in sim racing. Now I can't really prove other than showing that VR desktop is running, but trust me, all the footage you see will be wireless and I'll show how I actually do it at the end of the video for anybody that wants to replicate it. Okay, so let's just jump straight in. What you see right here is iRacing in VR at 90 frames per second or 90 Hz, running completely wirelessly via the Oculus Quest 2. Now, I've got on the left the overlay from Virtual Desktop Streamer, which is how I actually achieved this, that shows the latency that I have. And you can see we're sort of somewhere between 22 and 24 milliseconds. Now, what I don't know is whether that is true motion to photon latency or whether there's something a bit wrong in how that's calculated. For comparison, the original CV1 that I have is only 19 milliseconds of latency. But what I can say is with the 90 frames per second and it running at about 20-ish frames of latency, this feels pretty good. What you'll notice in this bit of footage is there's several times where I'm actually having to catch slides and I'm sort of being able to do it with ease really in the headset. This is actually better, I'd say, than my recent link experience that I had the other day. Now obviously, as I said in that last video, we're expecting Oculus and Facebook to come out with a new link update very soon. I know there's some people that have already got some little tweaks that you can up the resolution and up the bitrate. But the key thing that I'm really looking for with the link cable is 90 Hz or even 120, which they rumoured it might be able to do, and seeing that latency hopefully coming all the way down. When that eventually comes out, I'll definitely do a new update on that as well. But the key thing is, this definitely is working. So I've changed to actually be racing some other cars here. You'll notice my frames per second slightly dropped. Not quite as high and therefore the latency is not quite as low, but it's still completely playable. This might be slightly to do with the fact that I've got a pretty powerful rig, and I'll give all the details of how I set this up and how I got this working later on in the video. But it's pretty impressive nonetheless. So some people might be thinking, what's even the point of having a wireless headset for something like sim racing? I sort of agree with this. It's not quite the same as a standing title like Half-Life Alyx or something like that. But that said, it's still quite liberating actually having no wires in the back of your head and being able to move completely free, untethered. So I figured there may be some people that are really interested on the stats on my hardware. So I've got GPU-Z here, who's showing the load on my graphics processor. I've also still got Virtual Desktop up, showing the latency as well. And yeah, like at least on my rig and the way that I've got it set up, it definitely is usable. It really makes me excited for when the link update comes out, because it actually gives me a taste of what might actually come in the future once all the technology's been updated. But it's certainly an interesting time when you can actually run VR completely untethered. So I'd noticed a few people had asked about different codecs, and when I change it, it does slightly increase the latency, and I'll go through all the settings that I have later, but for me, keeping the latency as low as possible is probably key with something like sim racing. That said, I have heard other people say they found it slightly smoother and slightly better quality when you use this codec, but for me, I actually prefer it as it was. I didn't really find too much stuttering or drop frames. The connection was pretty steady throughout. That said, there is quite a lot that you have to do to make sure this all works correctly, and I'll cover that shortly in the video. So even though this video is completely about sim racing really, I just wanted to make a quick mention for titles like Half-Life Alyx. As you can see here, I'm running it. It's also doing 22 milliseconds of VR latency. This is probably really where the Oculus Quest 2, running completely wirelessly, comes into its own. Obviously the Oculus Quest 2 is a wireless headset when it's run standalone, but usually you have to connect a link cable to do PC VR gaming. With this, I can actually play Half-Life Alyx or any other standing up game from the PC wirelessly on the headset, and the level of freedom you have is really, really awesome. So, as I say, it may not be that worth it when the link upgrade comes out for actual sim racing, but definitely if you've got an Oculus Quest 2 and you've got a really good router, check this stuff out. Okay, so let's actually start talking about how we actually achieve this. Now, I've got Oculus Quest Subreddit up here. Now, this subreddit is full of really, really useful information. As you can see here, I've got VR desktop in desktop mode running with 13 milliseconds of latency. And it's down to articles like this here, where it gives you really, really good advice on how to achieve really, really smooth, fast virtual desktop. Before we actually look at how you actually achieve this, I just wanted to make a note of my current PC specs, since it may depend quite heavily on how powerful your PC is for actually how well this works. So my PC is currently a Ryzen 3700X with a Gigabyte RTX 3080 OC edition, 32GB of 3200 DDR4 RAM, and as I've said before, I'm using an Oculus Quest 2. I did want to mention this just because I think the way it works is it encodes and decodes the video, so you do need a fairly beefy PC to actually push that encoding really fast to not have too much latency. Okay, so let's start by talking about what you're actually going to need to achieve this. The first is Oculus Quest 2, although I think the original Quest does kind of work like this as well. The Quest 2 seems better from the fact it's Wi-Fi 6 and it has a faster processor for decoding. Second, you're going to want a Wi-Fi router that's capable of really fast 5 GHz speeds. So I thought you needed an AX router, which is Wi-Fi 6, but I think this can also be achieved on a good AC router as well. Next, you're going to want virtual desktop on the Quest 2, so you're going to have to buy that on the Quest 2 itself. After this, you'll need the virtual desktop streamer PC app. Then you're going to need something called Sidequest, which will allow you to put your Quest 2 into a 90Hz mode. Following this, Sidequest will also allow you to add the virtual desktop patch. And then finally, we need to do some configuration on the router and configuration on virtual desktop to achieve this. Okay, so let's start by talking about the router. Now, you can use your home router if you've got a good one already, but the recommended step for the best quality is to actually get a dedicated router that is separate to your home one that has loads of stuff on it. So a lot of people on the subreddit are currently using an AX1500, which is a relatively cheap Wi-Fi 6 router. I actually couldn't find one of these in the UK, so I actually got an AX50, which is kind of a modified version of the AX3000, but it seems that if you've got a good enough AC router, this may actually do the trick as well. The point is, you need a router that isn't going to get a lot of traffic on it, so having one dedicated that you're not going to have all your other devices on guarantees it's going to have the best latency, as it'll only be talking to the Quest back and forth. The other advantage of having a dedicated router is you can actually position it right near the Quest 2 play area. The key thing we're just trying to do is keep the latency as low as possible. If you check the subreddit, they've actually got an Excel sheet that has a list of all the routers and latencies they've found. So this is kind of how you actually want it all set up. You've basically got your internet router, and for me, that's actually connected to power line adapters that send an Ethernet style connection to where my PC is. I've then actually plugged in this dedicated router that you saw a second ago, which I've just called my Quest router. That's actually hardwired into essentially the LAN of my internet router. From there, I've then got my PC wired on a LAN port of the dedicated Quest router, and then I've got my Quest 2 wirelessly connected to this Quest router as well. What this means is that your Quest 2 is talking to the dedicated Quest router and then straight back out to the PC. In this configuration, I've got nothing else on the Quest 2 wireless router, so it should just be doing a load of traffic directly back and forth and then straight to the PC, therefore keeping the latency really low. So I've got my dedicated TP-Link Quest router actually set as access point rather than router. I believe this actually helps the latencies a bit more because the router actually has to do less, considering it's just an access point and it's just routing data from the PC to the wireless Quest and back. On the router's wireless settings, I've turned off 2.4 GHz completely. 5 GHz is a lot faster, so I'm just sending it straight through that and it has no other choice. I've also set it to 80 MHz channel width, and I've chosen a DFS channel that is a channel that should be less likely to be used. If you Google about DFS channels, they are basically the channels that are reserved for radar usage, and they're actually commonly not used automatically by routers. So if you use a tool like Wi-Fi Analyzer, you should be able to see what is in use and what isn't. And if you pick one that has no activity on it, this should actually give you a clear channel to do communication back and forth. On top of this, I've got the transmit power high, I've enabled MIMO, and I could have chosen just to choose AX mode, but I've actually left it so that it can choose AC or AX mode depending on what it thinks is going to work best. If you check the Oculus Quest 2 subreddit, you'll find there's lots of people discussing the best settings for lots of routers. As I've said before, AC routers seem to actually work quite well, providing you can get a fast 5 GHz channel. And if your device can do things like beamforming, I think that helps as well. Okay, next up, you're going to want to go on your store of your Oculus Quest and buy Virtual Desktop and install it. Now, there'll be some more stuff we need to do with Virtual Desktop in a second, including stuff with Sidequest, but for now, I just wanted to show my settings within Virtual Desktop in the Quest. You can see here, I've got graphics quality medium, 90 FPS, VR bitrate 90 Mbps, sliced encoding, increased color vibrance. I'm not sure if it matters, but in the settings area as well, I've got boost clock rates switched on. Apparently, I think this helps increase the clock rates in the actual Quest and therefore reduce latency again. On the PC, you want to download this Virtual Desktop Streamer app and have it running when you connect to it via the Quest 2. You can see the settings I've got here, so untick automatically adjust bitrate because that will mess things up. Use 264 encoder in my opinion, and just make sure the rest of your settings look like this. So the next thing we need to do is install Sidequest on our PC and then plug in our Oculus Quest 2 into the PC so we can access it via Sidequest. For anybody that doesn't know, Sidequest is a tool that lets you plug in your Quest or Quest 2 and sideload apps or products into the Quest. So to enable this to work, we need to install Virtual Desktop VR patch via Sidequest. So if you search for Virtual Desktop, you'll find this patch, and if you've got it plugged in, you should be able to just click install to headset. It'll install this to the headset. Final thing that we need is to enable 90 Hz mode. Now, hopefully eventually the Quest will be running at 90 Hz or even 120 Hz. But for now, we've got to go to Sidequest with it plugged in, click the 90 Hz button. It'll actually put the Quest into a 90 Hz mode, and then it'll have to reboot to actually enable this. Providing you've done all this and you configured it as I've shown, you should then be able to actually load iRacing or whatever VR title you want to run and actually have it load 90 frames per second wirelessly in the Quest 2. If anybody gets stuck doing this, if you check YouTube, there are some great videos out there by some other channels that really go into this step by step. So, is wireless gaming the future? For titles like Half-Life Alyx, it makes total sense to be completely untethered. I definitely think a real selling point of the Quest 2 is it's so easy to set it up completely wirelessly for PC VR. For sim racing though, I'm not 100% convinced that I will be racing competitively wirelessly. I'm hoping that when the new link cable update comes out, that should give me exactly what I need to actually achieve low latency, great quality VR sim racing. That said, definitely give this a go if you've got a router and you've got a Quest 2. It's definitely worth doing, especially for the standing up games. So hopefully this video has been really helpful for anybody out there. Definitely give it a like if it's helped you, and if you're first time here, please subscribe.